John Sills, energy consultant. The LPG industry has a real challenge because it's all fossil fuels essentially now. What's your perspective on how the LPG industry can defossilize? And my second question is, if it does, what does this do with the excess fossil LPG? Because it's going to be produced.
I think that's a good question. And I think that the last part of it's really important as well, because it is, in a lot of cases, it is the byproduct and you just can't stop from making it. And so what do you do with it? Now, these are molecules, right? So we're good in the refining industry. We can take LPGs and stick them together and now you've got gasoline or diesel or something else. And I think there's a lot of the chemical play, right? Chemical demand is growing at 2 times GDP. Right? So what you're really asking is, how do I find the right home for these chemicals if they're going to get produced anyway? I don't think you'll see a whole lot of on-purpose renewable LPGs produced, because that feedstock is going to be pulled into SAF, into renewable diesel and other things, probably more so. And I say that there's some things that will go straight from biomass or other products straight into chemicals, which will be, similar building blocks as that. But then it kind of comes down to the similar challenge that traditional fossil refineries are going to face is, how do you find ways to decarbonize? So you have your own Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions as part of the LPG business. So how do you find ways to decarbonize that? And looking at the trade flow, a big piece of that's going to be on shipping, right? So how do you decarbonize the shipping? And we've seen a lot of ideas there, from renewable methanol, renewable ammonia. The last one I heard about was actually fitting carbon capture onto vessels, which I had a hard time understanding that one. Because as you burn the fuel, but you capture CO2, the ship's going to get heavier as you go instead of lighter. And so I don't know how that works, but they seem pretty serious about it. But it's not an easy problem to solve.
You mentioned earlier, Uday, actually, you mentioned it earlier that Oregon, Washington, California are banning internal combustion engines by 2025 or 2030. I don't know, but is that real? Do you think that's realistic? Or is that good policy? Are people in California going to ride horses to their work? Not everybody can afford an electric car.
You have a different environmental problem then.
Yeah, that's true.
I think what we've heard, and we had our refining EVP just retired last year, but when he was a bit of a curmudgeon on some of this stuff because he didn't believe it. He goes, well, yeah, that's fine. What they're doing is they're banning sales. He goes, it's fine. I'll just retire and open a casino and a used car lot in Reno, right? And it's not a big deal. So they're not, from what I've seen, no one's banning you from owning them, right? They just don't want any sales there. So it's going to really have to spread beyond just a couple states before that particular policy makes a difference. It's really the incentives on the EVs that are going to drive it. The challenge with the incentives, though, is that they're tying so many strings to it. If CO2 really is a problem, just put a price on CO2 and let the market efficiently figure it out. But now not only is it, I'm going to pick certain types of vehicles, and you have to have the supply chain here, and there's an environmental justice piece to it. You have to have prevailing rates. All these dollars in the IRA, they're going to be dang hard to get with all the strings tied to them. So I don't know if that answers your question or not.
I had a quick question. You mentioned alcohol to jet a couple times as a path to get to SAF. I've also seen other people looking at FT as a path to get there.
What's that path?
Fischer-Tropsch.
Oh, Fischer-Tropsch, yeah. E-fuels, right?
Yeah. I just wondered, have you guys made a position that you're looking at alcohol to jet over other routes? Or
I think this falls into the category of which ideas are good for us. And so Fischer-Tropsch and those e-fuels technologies are well understood, but the volumes are typically small. And if you're doing it through a true green hydrogen, it takes more energy to split the water molecule to get the hydrogen off than you ever get back consuming the hydrogen. A lot of folks want to use direct air capture CO2, maybe at $400 a ton incentive, that makes sense. So you can do it, but it's been a while since I've seen the numbers, but you're talking $40 a gallon to produce e-fuels. But if you can get the CI down to like minus 50, you can get the math to work. We think the feedstock challenge, with having lots of excess ethanol, it's not that hard of technologies. A little bit, you have to dehydrate it. Okay, now you have ethylene. Now you're just stacking C2 molecules until you get up to the C10, 12, 14, whatever you're looking for. And it just seems to us that two things. One, it's straightforward technology for the most part, and it's the scale. right? For the dollar, it's capital efficient for the scale you're creating. Right? The CI is not going to be as low as e-fuels, but you're going to be able to feed the market a whole lot more volume that allows you to hit some of those targets a lot sooner. So we're not against someone doing e-fuels. It's probably just not the core for us. One in the back, maybe?
So I had a quick question that we see that the rodeo is mainly based on HEFA, and used cooking oil is emerging as a very competitive market. So how does Phillips 66 view feedstock, or do you think you may venture out into adding feedstock capabilities as well, or how do you see that upstream value chain?
Yeah, well, we've seen a lot of deals being done. People are out there buying cooking oil aggregators. People are buying ag companies, and some of the valuations you see of some of these deals done just blow you away. And again, the volumes are very small. We have a lot of confidence in our commercial trading team. So I kind of mentioned earlier, we have some really key aggregation points from Asia through Europe to the Gulf Coast to the West Coast. So having the capability to run almost anything, and having key, and a lot of it's leased, but having key infrastructure for aggregation is important. And then like a lot of things, it comes down to those relationships of who you're dealing with. A lot of these are kind of mom and pop places, right? Before you could charge them for the tallow just to get it out of their way because they didn't know what to do with it. They're starting to get a little more sophisticated, so you're having to compete for that. But we feel good where we are, and we still may step out again and put more capital there. It's a balance. How much capital do you want on first mile, the feedstock? How much do you want inside the fence, and how much do you want on last mile to make sure you're capturing all the credits? And it's a balance across there. But the investment we've announced at Rodeo really is just the inside the fence announcement. We actually have quite a bit more we're putting into the whole value chain to make sure we're not overly exposed.
Hi. So if you look at certain parts of the world, they're investing a lot into nuclear power. Why are we not investing in nuclear power? It's not renewable, but definitely the cleanest form of energy. Why aren't we doing it? What's stopping?
I am not the right audience to answer that question, right?
right.
It's a fair point. There's a little bit of not in my backyard, right? Who wants either the nuclear plant or the nuclear waste in their backyard? You're bringing logic to the conversation, which is sometimes a challenge. So I don't know why, but I agree with you. If we really cared about decarbonization, we'd find a way to make that part of the solution.
Thanks.
When you mentioned about rodeo and project in California that has RIN and LCFS credits, right? Is there any other location that you guys are looking at that may not have the LCFS, for example? Or does it make sense?
Yeah, and what we're seeing, there's so much volume coming into California because everyone's chasing the same LCFS credit. And so we actually, we have operations in every pad in the U.S., right? We're spread out. We've got, almost a dozen different facilities. We have 25,000 miles of pipeline, I think, 50 terminals. So we're monitoring that, all right? I've got someone on the team who does nothing but try to understand all the different regulations from federal to state level to what's going on in Europe. We've seen Colorado come forward. I mentioned Illinois before. Then as it come down to the premium, right? So you have a base place to look at in California to price things off of. Then it comes back to your customer then. And if they really want it in O'Hare, they want it in Atlanta, it's okay, we can do it for you, but you're gonna keep us whole. You can save the transportation cost if you're making it in Illinois. And then you can find ways to kind of bridge it. But again, markets are efficient, right? And people are gonna figure it out. Right now, California is the biggest incentive, so we're all gonna chase it. Rodeo just happens to be in the perfect place for it as well, right? With full pipeline connection to SFO for the SAF side of it. So we think there'll be more places follow along. One thing we always challenge ourselves to ask the question is, what's gonna happen faster? Over-regulation or overbuilding by the industry, right? And it's kind of a bit of a race, but the regulation can come pretty quick. So that's kind of where we kind of fall on that one.
Just a quick follow-up on that, Heath. I mean, Washington, right? Ferndale is right there, and your refinery in Ferndale, and Washington has similar LCFS. I'm curious, why haven't we seen, I may be wrong, but I don't remember of any conversions or SAF or renewable diesel projects outside of California.
No, not yet. We've looked at, you'll see more co-processing there as well. We've looked at some of that. And we've looked at other ways to decarbonize, including green hydrogen. But you have to have a sophisticated, commercial group.
Yeah.
Because the rules are written differently in each state or even each country.
Sure.
And so we were looking at this a few months ago. If you run canola oil through Rodeo to make renewable diesel, well, you'd rather put that on a barge and sell it in Toronto because you get paid more for it, because the way they calculate carbon intensity for canola on the pathway is more attractive than what you get in California. It doesn't make any logical sense to send it up there. It's all the same planet, it's all the same, right, CO2 issue. But you get incented to do things like that. And so-
Unlike you guys, we love that kind of complexity. That creates work for us. So.
Our commercial guys love it because anytime it's complicated, they can create an arb around it, right? If you're more sophisticated than the other trading house,
Yeah.
And you have logistics to back you up, you can make money. So it's a good thing for Phillips, just as a typical, consumer or citizen. It doesn't make a lot of sense.
More questions? Last call for Heath.
I have a question here.
Oh yeah, right here.
Where's it coming from? Oh, there you
She's
go.
going to ask you about pricing again, Heath.
Yes.
When we talk about rodeo, we mentioned renewable naphtha as one of the co-products. What about the rest? Biopropane, butane?
Typically what happens, and even some places in naphtha you'll do this, again, this is all about CI, right? The currency in the market is carbon intensity. And so what makes the most logical sense is to take that propane and put it back in your fuel gas system and lower your, those emissions, the scope 1 emissions, and it lowers the CI. So you monetize the value of that renewable propane or butane by selling your renewable diesel or renewable jet for a higher price because the CI is now lower.
So basically you take all the co-products and then you burn them to reduce the overall system CI, and therefore...
Depends on where you're at, right? If you have great infrastructure and you already have the ability to segregate propane, it's just a question of how much do you want to spend on top of the project to be able to take to market those materials. And you'll do the math. And in fact, maybe you want the option, depending on the price of LCFS or who's paying what premium for their feedstock. Sometimes maybe you choose to burn the naphtha or do something else with it. At other times you sell it to the chemicals person if they're going to pay for it. So you have to just decide what optionality makes sense for you, and that'll vary by asset location.
Heath, I'm so grateful to you. It's always a pleasure talking to you. Grateful to you for the support to our firm over the years, and then more, for coming here and having these freewheeling conversations. I know it's hard you have a strict lane to kind of stay within, but you always share a lot, and super grateful to you for that. Let's give Heath a big hand.
Thank you.